The coffee was still steaming when Lila dropped the bomb that would change everything. "I want everything kept separate from now on," she announced, not even looking up from her phone as she scrolled through what I assumed was another social media feed full of her yoga instructor friends and their perfect lives. I paused, my mug halfway to my lips, steam fogging my glasses. Separate how? Bank accounts, bills, responsibilities, everything. She finally glanced up, her green eyes cold as the Maine morning outside our kitchen window. "I'm tired of feeling like I'm carrying the weight of this relationship alone." That was rich, coming from someone whose biggest contribution to our household was complaining about the Wi-Fi speed when her meditation apps wouldn't load fast enough. "Of course," I replied, setting down my coffee with deliberate calm. "Wouldn't want my blue-collar paycheck contaminating your designer lifestyle." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic, Eli. This is about fairness. About each of us taking responsibility for our own choices." Elliot Granger, that's me. 42 years old, owner of Granger's Auto and Marine, the kind of guy who fixes things for a living. Boats, cars, relationships that seemed to be running just fine, until someone decided they needed an overhaul. Our Victorian house creaked around us, the old bones settling into another day. We'd bought it together 8 years ago, back when Lila still laughed at my jokes and didn't flinch when I touched her shoulder. Now the place felt like a museum of better times, all polished surfaces and carefully arranged spaces that screamed, "Look but don't touch." "So what exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew this conversation was heading somewhere I wouldn't like. Separate bedrooms, separate finances. We split the bills down the middle, handle our own expenses, make our own decisions. She was using her marketing voice now, the one she deployed when pitching campaigns to local businesses. Smooth, professional, completely devoid of warmth. "And what about the house? The mortgage?" "We'll figure it out. Maybe refinance, put it in both names officially, split the payments." She waved her hand dismissively. "Rick can help us with the paperwork." Rick Dalton, our lawyer, also her college friend, which explained why she was so confident about getting legal advice that would work in her favor. I nodded slowly, watching her face. There was something else here, something she wasn't saying. In 20 years of marriage, I'd learned to read the subtle signs, the way she avoided eye contact when she was hiding something, the slight flush in her cheeks when she was excited about a secret, the way she kept checking her phone, as if waiting for a message from someone important. "All right," I said finally. "Separate it is." She blinked, clearly surprised by my easy agreement. "Really? Just like that? You've obviously thought this through. Who am I to stand in the way of your independence?" I stood up, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. "I'll move my things to the spare room tonight." "Eli, wait!" But I was already heading out, letting the screen door slam behind me with a satisfying bang. Mrs. Dalrymple, our 70-something neighbor, was watering her roses and pretended not to be eavesdropping, though I caught her quick glance in my direction. "Morning, Mrs. D," I called out, my voice carrying just enough volume to let her know I was aware of her surveillance. "Oh. Good morning, Eli. Everything all right over there?" I thought I heard raised voices. In a town like Millfield, Maine, population 3,847, Mrs. Dalrymple was better than CNN for local news. Whatever I told her would be common knowledge by lunchtime. "Just working out some household logistics," I replied, climbing into my truck. "Nothing that can't be handled with proper planning." She nodded knowingly, the kind of nod that suggested she'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. The drive to my shop gave me time to think. Lila's sudden desire for separation wasn't random. She'd been different lately, staying out later, dressing up for work events that never seemed to involve her actual co-workers, spending more time at that new members-only club downtown that catered to what she called networking professionals and what I called people with more money than sense. My phone buzzed as I pulled into the marina parking lot. Frank Kowalski, my business partner and best friend since high school, was already there, coffee in hand, and a knowing smirk on his weathered face. "Let me guess," Frank said as I got out of the truck. "Lila's decided you're not sophisticated enough for her evolving lifestyle? How'd you know?" "Saw her at Murphy's last night with that Carter guy, the one with the Tesla and the fancy suits." Frank spit into the harbor water. They were sitting pretty close for two people just networking. "Carter Madsen, I should have known. The guy had rolled into town 6 months ago, claiming to be some kind of entrepreneur, though nobody could figure out exactly what he actually did besides drive an expensive car and buy drinks for married women at the local club. She wants everything separate," I told Frank as we walked toward the shop. "Finances, living arrangements, the works." "And you said?" I said, of course. Wouldn't want to hold her back from achieving her full potential. Frank laughed, a rough sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "You've got that look, Eli. The same one you had when Tommy Brennan tried to stiff us on that boat repair bill." Tommy Brennan had ended up paying double after I was done with him, plus interest and a public apology. But that was different. That was business. This was personal. The next few days passed in a strange kind of domestic choreography. Lila and I moved around each other like polite strangers, dividing up household responsibilities with the efficiency of a corporate merger. She took the master bedroom. I moved into the guest room. She handled her bills. I handled mine. She made her own coffee. I made mine. It should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like living with a roommate I used to sleep with. But I wasn't idle. 20-plus years in a small town teaches you that information is currency, and I'd been saving up for a rainy day. "Carter Madsen," I said to Frank as we worked on a lobster boat engine that had seen better decades. "What do we actually know about him?" Frank wiped his hands on a rag, leaving streaks of grease that would never completely wash out. "Showed up in February. Claims he's in real estate development, but nobody's seen him develop anything except a bar tab and a reputation for hitting on other men's wives." "Real estate's a matter of public record," I mused. "Property transfers, business licenses, that sort of thing." "You thinking of doing some research?" "I'm thinking knowledge is power. And right now, I feel distinctly underpowered." That afternoon, while Lila was at what she called a marketing consultation, but what I suspected was something else entirely, I paid a visit to the town hall. Millfield might be small, but we kept meticulous records, mostly because Mrs. Henderson, the town clerk, had nothing better to do than catalog every piece of paperwork that crossed her desk. "Eli Granger," she chirped as I walked into the dusty office that smelled like old paper and industrial coffee. "What brings you down here?" "Don't tell me you're finally running for selectman." "Just doing some research, Mrs. H. Looking into property records for a Carter Madsen." Her fingers flew across her computer keyboard with surprising speed for someone who'd been eligible for retirement when I was in high school. Carter Madsen. Carter Madsen. Oh, here we go." She frowned at the screen. "That's odd." "What's odd?" "Well, he's listed as the contact for several property inquiries, but I don't see any actual purchases or sales. Lots of preliminary paperwork, option agreements that expired, that sort of thing, but no actual transactions. Interesting. A real estate developer who didn't actually develop real estate." "What about business licenses?" More clicking. More frowning. "He's got a business registration for something called Madsen Development Consulting. But," she adjusted her glasses, "no tax payments on file, no employee records. It's like he registered the business but never actually conducted any business." I thanked Mrs. Henderson and drove back toward town, my mind working through the implications. Carter was running some kind of game. But what kind? And more importantly, how did Lila fit into it? My phone rang as I pulled into the parking lot of Murphy's Tavern, the kind of place where locals went to drink beer and complain about tourists. The caller ID showed my house number. "Eli?" "It's me." Lila's voice sounded strained. We need to talk. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you come home? On my way. I found her in the kitchen, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Her usually perfect hair was mussed, and she'd been chewing on her bottom lip, a nervous habit she'd never quite shaken. I've been thinking about this separation thing, she began without preamble. Maybe we moved too fast. Maybe we should try counseling first, work through our issues together. What changed your mind? She hesitated, and in that pause, I heard everything she wasn't saying. I think we owe it to our marriage to try everything before we give up. Our marriage. I leaned against the counter, studying her face. The same marriage you wanted to keep completely separate 3 days ago. Don't be sarcastic, Eli. This is hard enough as it is. What's hard? The separation, or explaining to Carter why you're having second thoughts? The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Carter Madsen, entrepreneur extraordinaire, drives a Tesla, buys expensive drinks, tells married women exactly what they want to hear about their untapped potential. You're being paranoid. Am I? Because I did a little research today, and it turns out your new friend Carter has a very interesting business model. He registers companies but doesn't run them. He makes property deals but doesn't close them. He's got all the trappings of success but none of the actual substance. Lila's jaw tightened. Even if that were true, which I'm not saying it is, what does it have to do with us? Maybe nothing. Or maybe everything. Maybe Carter's the kind of guy who targets women in shaky marriages, tells them they deserve better, convinces them to make changes that benefit him more than them. That's ridiculous. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you decided you wanted everything separate right around the time Carter started paying attention to you. And now, 3 days later, you want to reconcile. What happened, Lila? Did he lose interest once he realized you weren't as financially independent as he thought? She slammed her hand down on the counter, hard enough to make the sugar bowl jump. You don't know anything about Carter, or about what I want, or about anything except your precious boats and cars and your small-minded little world where everyone stays in their place and never wants anything better. There it was. The truth, finally out in the open. So this is about me not being good enough for your evolving standards. This is about me feeling like I'm suffocating in a life that's too small for who I'm becoming. And Carter represents something bigger? Carter represents possibility. He sees potential in me that you've never bothered to notice. I nodded slowly, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. Well then, I said, grabbing my keys again. I guess we understand each other perfectly. You want possibilities and I want honesty. Since we can't seem to manage both in the same house, let's stick with the separation plan. Eli, wait. But I was already walking away just like I had 3 days earlier. Except this time, I wasn't coming back to play house with someone who thought I was too small for her big dreams. This time, I was going to show her exactly how big my world could get when I put my mind to it. Frank was still at the marina when I got back, working late on an engine rebuild that had been giving us trouble all week. He took one look at my face and reached into the small refrigerator we kept in the office, pulling out 2 bottles of beer. That bad, huh? I told him about the conversation with Lila, about Carter, about the whole mess that my marriage had apparently become without me noticing. So what's your play? Frank asked when I finished. She wants everything separate. I'm going to give her exactly what she asked for. Meaning? Meaning tomorrow morning I'm calling Rick Dalton and having him draw up paperwork to sell my half of the house. Frank nearly choked on his beer. To who? To whoever wants to buy it. Could be an investor, could be someone looking for rental property, could be someone who wants to renovate and flip it. I took a long drink, savoring the bitter taste. Point is, it won't be mine anymore. If Lila wants to live there, she can work out arrangements with the new owner. That's actually pretty brilliant, and completely legal. Legal's important. I'm not looking to break any laws here, just to honor my wife's request for complete financial separation. Frank grinned, the kind of expression that had gotten us both in trouble back in high school. You know, I might know someone who'd be interested in a half share of a Victorian house. Yeah? My cousin Danny. He's been looking for investment property, something he can rent out to summer tourists. A house like yours, right in the historic district? That's prime real estate. Danny's the one who owns the construction company? That's him. He's got cash, and he's not sentimental about business decisions. You want me to give him a call? I thought about it. Danny Kowalski was Frank's cousin, but more importantly, he was a straight shooter who treated business like business. If he bought my half of the house, he'd be fair but firm with Lila about rent, maintenance, and house rules. Make the call, I said. The next morning, I was at Rick Dalton's office when he opened at 9. Rick had been practicing law in Millfield for 15 years, handling everything from real estate closings to divorce proceedings with the kind of small-town efficiency that kept his clients happy and his overhead low. Eli, he said, looking genuinely surprised to see me. I wasn't expecting you. Lila said you two were working things out privately. When did you talk to Lila? Yesterday afternoon. She called about setting up some kind of post-nuptial agreement, formalizing the financial separation you two discussed. Rick gestured for me to sit down. I told her it was unusual but not impossible. Interesting. So while Lila was telling me she wanted to reconcile, she was simultaneously moving forward with legal separation. That was either very smart planning or very dishonest communication. Probably both. Actually, I'm here about the house, I said. I want to sell my half. Rick blinked. Sell your half? To Lila? To anyone who wants to buy it. I've got a potential buyer lined up, cash deal, quick closing. Eli, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Selling half your house is a big decision, especially in the middle of marital difficulties. I'm sure. Lila wants complete financial separation. This is me giving her exactly what she asked for. Rick pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. All right, I'll need to research the deed, make sure there aren't any restrictions on partial sales. Maine property law can be tricky, especially with older houses. How long will it take? If everything's straightforward? A week, maybe 2. But Eli, you should know that Lila will have certain rights as your spouse, even if you sell your half to a third party. What kind of rights? Residency rights for one. She can't just be evicted without proper notice, even if she's not on the deed. But those rights have limits, and they definitely don't include free housing indefinitely. Perfect. Lila could stay in the house, but she'd have to negotiate with Danny about rent, utilities, and maintenance. She wanted independence. She was about to get more than she bargained for. I spent the rest of the morning at the marina, but my mind wasn't on boat engines or customer service. I was thinking about chess, about moving pieces into position, about the difference between tactics and strategy. Lila had made a tactical move by demanding separation. She thought she was positioning herself for something better with Carter while keeping me as a backup plan. But tactics without strategy are just random moves that eventually leave you vulnerable. I was playing a longer game. My phone buzzed around noon. A text from Lila. Can we have dinner tonight? I think we should talk more about counseling. I typed back, sorry, working late. Rain check? Her response came immediately. This is important, Eli. Our marriage is important. Of course it is. That's why I want to make sure we both get exactly what we need. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. What's that supposed to mean? It means I love you enough to give you the independence you're looking for. No response to that one. Frank found me an hour later, staring out at the harbor and thinking about the difference between love and respect, between wanting someone and needing them. Danny's interested, Frank reported. Wants to see the house this weekend, but he's already talking numbers. Says if the inspection goes well, he can close in 10 days. Cash? Cash? He's been saving up for the right investment opportunity, and a half share in a Victorian house in the historic district sounds like exactly what he's been looking for. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm settling over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just reacting to whatever crisis Lila had manufactured. Set it up, I said. And Frank? Let's keep this quiet until the paperwork's signed. No point in complicating things unnecessarily. Frank's grin was pure mischief. You know, I'm starting to think Lila has no idea who she's messing with. She's about to find out. The house showing went better than I'd expected. Danny Kowalski walked through every room with the practiced eye of someone who'd been in construction for 20 years, checking foundations, testing faucets, examining the electrical panel with the kind of thoroughness that made me glad I'd kept up with maintenance over the years. It's a solid house, he told me as we stood in the backyard, looking up at the Victorians' ornate trim work. Good bones, decent updates, prime location. I can work with this. What are you thinking for rent? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Market rate for a house this size in the historic district? Probably $1,500 a month, plus utilities. Maybe $2,000 during peak tourist season if I decide to go the short-term rental route. I did quick math in my head. Lila's take-home pay from the marketing agency was maybe $3,000 a month. After taxes, car payment, insurance, and her various lifestyle expenses, $1,500 in rent would be a significant chunk of her budget. When can you close? I asked. Rick says the paperwork should be ready by Friday. I can have certified funds available Monday morning. We shook hands, and I felt the weight of the decision settling into my bones. There was no going back from this point. Once Danny owned half the house, Lila would have to deal with him directly about her living situation. I was curious to see how her newfound independence would handle that reality. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Tuesday evening, I was at Murphy's Tavern having a burger and watching the Red Sox lose to the Yankees when my phone exploded with calls. First Lila, then Rick, then Lila again, then a number I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail and ordered another beer. The first message was from Rick. Eli, call me as soon as you get this. We need to talk about the house sale. The second was from Lila. What the hell did you do? Call me back right now. The third was also from Lila, but calmer. Eli, please. We need to discuss this like adults. The fourth was from Danny. Hey, it's Danny Kowalski. Got a call from some woman claiming to be your wife, asking about rental agreements. Figured you should know. I finished my beer, paid my tab, and drove home through the quiet streets of Millfield, taking my time. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree when I pulled into the driveway, and I could see Lila pacing back and forth in the living room. She met me at the door before I could even get my key out. You sold the house? Her voice was somewhere between disbelief and fury. You actually sold our house without telling me? I sold my half of the house, I corrected, stepping past her into the hallway. Just like you wanted. Complete financial separation, remember? That's not what I meant, and you know it. What did you mean then? Because from where I stand, it looks like you wanted all the benefits of separation without any of the consequences. She followed me into the kitchen, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like an angry metronome. I meant separate finances, separate responsibilities, not selling the house out from under me. The house is still here. You're still here. The only thing that changed is that you now have a landlord instead of a husband when it comes to housing arrangements. A landlord? Her voice cracked slightly. Eli, this is our home. It was our home. Now it's your rental property. Danny seems like a reasonable guy, though. I'm sure you two can work out terms that make sense for everyone. I opened the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of water, mainly to give myself something to do with my hands. Lila was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. I can't afford to rent this place, she said quietly. Not on my salary. Then maybe you should consider downsizing. There are some nice apartments over on Elm Street. Much more manageable for someone who values financial independence. You're punishing me. I'm honoring your request. You wanted everything separate. Congratulations, you got exactly what you asked for. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, and for a moment she looked genuinely lost. Part of me, the part that had loved her for 20 years, wanted to sit down beside her and figure out how to fix this mess together. But that part was getting smaller every day. What about Carter? I asked. Can't he help with the rent? I mean, if you two are as close as people say, surely he'd be willing to contribute to your housing costs. Her head snapped up. Carter and I are friends, that's all. Friends who have dinner together 3 nights a week? Friends who disappear for hours at a time without explanation? Friends who inspire married women to suddenly demand complete independence from their husbands? It's not like that. Then what is it like, Lila? Because I'm genuinely curious. What exactly is Carter's role in your life, and how does it fit with your vision of our marriage? She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. He makes me feel like I matter, she said finally. Like I'm more than just someone's wife in a small town where nothing ever changes. And I don't make you feel that way. You make me feel safe, comfortable, like everything's going to stay exactly the same forever. I nodded, understanding finally clicking into place. So Carter represents excitement, and I represent stability. Carter makes you feel special, and I make you feel secure. And you wanted to keep both of us, just in separate compartments where you could access whatever you needed whenever you needed it. That's exactly what it is. You wanted me to be your safety net while you explored other possibilities. You wanted complete independence without any actual independence. You wanted to have your cake and eat it too. She didn't deny it this time. Well, congratulations, I continued. You're about to get more independence than you ever imagined. Danny's a fair landlord, but he's also a businessman. He's not going to subsidize your lifestyle or make exceptions because you used to be married to his cousin's business partner. I headed toward the stairs, then paused. Oh, and Lila? You might want to ask Carter about his business model before you make any long-term plans. Turns out, entrepreneurship isn't as lucrative as he's been pretending. I left her sitting in the kitchen and went upstairs to pack the rest of my things. I'd been staying in the guest room anyway, but now it was time to make the arrangement official. Frank had offered me the apartment above the marina office, and suddenly that sounded like exactly the kind of independence I needed. Moving into the apartment above the marina felt like stepping into a different life. The space was small but functional, a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen that was basically a hot plate and a mini fridge, and a living area with windows that looked out over the harbor. It wasn't much, but it was mine. More importantly, it was separate. I'd been there 3 days when the delegation arrived. I was having my morning coffee and watching the lobster boats head out when I heard voices on the stairs leading up to my apartment. Multiple voices, and they didn't sound happy. The knock on my door was sharp and demanding. Eli? We need to talk. I recognized the voice immediately. Grace Morrison, Lila's best friend and self-appointed spokesperson for the sisterhood of women who thought their husbands were holding them back from their true potential. I opened the door to find Grace flanked by 2 other women I recognized from Lila's social circle, Jennifer Walsh, who ran the yoga studio, and Sandra Chen, who worked at the bank and had opinions about everyone's financial decisions. Ladies, I said, leaning against the doorframe, to what do I owe this pleasure? You know exactly why we're here, Grace snapped. She was a small woman with big hair and an even bigger sense of righteous indignation. What you did to Lila is unconscionable. What did I do to Lila? Don't play dumb, Eli. You sold her house out from under her, left her with nowhere to live, all because she wanted a little independence in her marriage. I sold my half of the house, which is my legal right, and Lila has somewhere to live, the same house she's always lived in. She just has to pay rent now, like an independent adult. Jennifer stepped forward, her yoga-toned arms crossed over her chest. You're being vindictive. This isn't about independence, it's about control. You're right, I said. It is about control. Specifically about Lila wanting to control every aspect of our relationship, while taking responsibility for none of it. That's not true, Sandra chimed in. Lila just wanted some financial autonomy. That's perfectly reasonable. Financial autonomy while living in a house I was paying for, eating food I was buying, driving a car I was insuring. That's not autonomy, that's subsidized independence. Grace's face was turning red. You're twisting everything around. Lila loves you, but she needed some space to figure out what she wanted. And I gave her exactly that. All the space she could possibly want. By making her homeless. By making her responsible for her own housing costs. There's a difference. The three women exchanged glances, and I could see them shifting into attack formation. We know about Carter, Jennifer said like she was playing a trump card. Good for you. What about him? We know you're jealous of their friendship, and you're taking it out on Lila. I laughed, which clearly wasn't the reaction they were expecting. Jealous? Of Carter Madsen? The guy who pretends to be a real estate developer but hasn't actually developed anything? The guy who drives a leased Tesla and pays for drinks with credit cards that are probably maxed out? That Carter? Carter's a successful businessman, Grace protested. He's got vision, ambition, he's got debt and delusions. But hey, if Lila wants to hitch her wagon to that particular star, she's free to do it. Just not on my dime. Sandra stepped closer, her banker's instincts kicking in. What do you mean, debt? I mean, Carter's business model seems to involve a lot of talk and very little actual business. His company exists on paper, but there's no evidence of any real revenue. He makes option agreements on properties but never follows through with purchases. He's either incompetent or running some kind of long con. You're lying, Grace said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Why don't you ask him to show you his tax returns? Or, better yet, ask him to explain exactly what Madsen Development Consulting actually does besides provide him with impressive-sounding business cards. The three women were looking less certain now, which told me they'd probably had similar doubts, but hadn't wanted to voice them. Even if that's true, Jennifer said, it doesn't justify what you're doing to Lila. What am I doing to Lila? Giving her exactly what she asked for? Treating her like the independent adult she claims to want to be? You're being cruel. I'm being honest. For the first time in months, maybe years, I'm being completely honest about what this relationship actually is. Grace pulled out her phone. I'm calling Lila. She needs to hear this. Go ahead. But you might want to ask her where she's been spending her nights lately, because it hasn't been at the house. That stopped them cold. What do you mean? Sandra asked. I mean, Lila hasn't slept in that house since Monday. According to Danny, she packed a bag and left without saying where she was going or when she'd be back. She's staying with me, Grace said quickly. Too quickly. Really? Because your car was in your driveway all night last night, and Lila's wasn't. I know because Frank drove past your place around midnight on his way home from poker night. Grace's face went pale. So where is she, Grace? And more importantly, who is she with? The silence stretched out between us like a taut wire. You don't know, do you? I continued. Your friend, the one you're here defending, didn't bother to tell you where she was going or who she was going with. She just disappeared, leaving you to clean up her mess and make excuses for her choices. Jennifer and Sandra were both staring at Grace now, clearly waiting for an explanation that wasn't coming. She needed space, Grace said weakly. From me, maybe, but apparently not from Carter. I stepped back into my apartment and started to close the door. Ladies, it's been enlightening, but I have work to do. When you see Lila, tell her Danny's expecting her to call about the rental agreement. He's been very patient, but his patience isn't infinite. Eli, wait. I closed the door and listened to their footsteps retreat down the stairs. Through my window, I watched them walk to Grace's car, their body language tense with argument and confusion. My phone rang 5 minutes later. Frank. You just had visitors, he said without preamble. How'd you know? Because they're sitting in Grace's car in our parking lot, and they look like they're planning either a funeral or a murder, possibly both. They're probably trying to figure out where Lila's been sleeping. Any ideas? I thought about it. Carter drove a Tesla, which suggested he was either very successful or very good at maintaining the appearance of success. In a town like Millfield, there weren't many places someone like that would choose to stay. Try the Ocean View Inn, I said. It's the only place in town that matches Carter's self-image. You want me to drive by, see if his car's there? Nah. Let them figure it out themselves. I'm done doing other people's detective work. But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't over. Lila was making choices that would have consequences, and those consequences were starting to catch up with everyone involved. The question was, how far was she willing to go to avoid dealing with reality? I had a feeling I was about to find out. The answer came sooner than I expected. Thursday morning, I was at the marina office going over invoices when Danny Kowalski walked in, looking like a man who'd been dealing with problems he hadn't signed up for. We need to talk, he said, settling his considerable bulk into the chair across from my desk. Let me guess. Lila? Your wife? Ex-wife? Whatever she is, she showed up at my house at 7 this morning demanding to know what right I had to charge her rent for her own home. I winced. How'd that go? About as well as you'd expect. She was with some guy in a fancy car and he was doing most of the talking. Kept going on about tenant rights and illegal eviction procedures and how I was taking advantage of a vulnerable woman. Carter. That's the guy. Real piece of work. Acted like he was some kind of lawyer, throwing around legal terms that sounded impressive, but didn't actually mean anything. What did you tell them? I told them the truth. That I own half the house, that she's welcome to stay as long as she pays rent and follows the lease agreement, and that if she doesn't like those terms, she's free to find somewhere else to live. And Danny's expression darkened. The fancy car guy started getting aggressive. Said he knew people, had connections, could make things difficult for me if I didn't reconsider my position. That was a mistake. Danny Kowalski had been dealing with difficult people since before Carter was old enough to lease his first luxury vehicle. I'm guessing you weren't impressed by his threats. I was impressed enough to record the whole conversation on my phone. Amazing how quickly people calm down when they realize their words might end up in front of a judge. Smart man. So what's the current situation? She's got until Friday to sign the lease agreement and pay first month's rent plus security deposit. If she doesn't, I start eviction proceedings on Monday. That's fair. Maybe. But Eli, I got to ask, are you sure you want to put her through this? I mean, I know you two are having problems, but making her homeless seems pretty harsh. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about how to explain the situation without sounding like a complete bastard. Danny, what would you do if your wife told you she wanted complete financial independence, then expected you to keep paying all her bills while she explored other relationships? I'd probably do exactly what you're doing. Lila made her choice. She chose Carter and independence over marriage and partnership. I'm just making sure she gets to live with the consequences of that choice instead of expecting me to subsidize it. Danny nodded slowly. Fair enough. But you should know, this Carter guy, he's not going to help her with the rent. How do you know? Because when I mentioned the security deposit, he suddenly remembered he had somewhere else to be. Left your wife standing in my driveway while he drove off in his fancy car. That sounded about right. Carter was happy to play the supportive friend as long as it didn't cost him anything, but the moment real money was involved, his commitment evaporated. She say anything after he left? Asked if there was any way to work out a payment plan. I told her I was running a business, not a charity, but that I was willing to discuss options if she could demonstrate good faith. Meaning? Meaning, if she can come up with half the money by Friday, I'll give her another 2 weeks to come up with the rest. After that, though, we're done negotiating. I thanked Danny and spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on work instead of wondering what Lila's next move would be. I didn't have to wonder long. Around noon, my phone rang. Rick Dalton. Eli, I just got a very interesting call from your wife. She wants to explore her legal options regarding the house sale. What kind of options? She seems to think there might be grounds for challenging the sale based on marital property laws. She's also asking about the possibility of forcing you to buy back your half at current market value. I laughed, which probably wasn't the reaction Rick was expecting. Rick, you handled the sale. Was everything legal and above board? Completely. You had every right to sell your interest in the property. The fact that you were married doesn't change that, especially since the deed was in your name only. And the market value thing? She can ask, but she can't force. You sold your property to a willing buyer at an agreed-upon price. There's no legal mechanism for compelling you to buy it back. So she's out of luck? Legally, yes. But Eli, she sounded pretty desperate. And desperate people sometimes make poor decisions. That turned out to be prophetic. Friday afternoon, I was closing up the marina office when Frank came running over from the gas dock, his face grim. You need to see this, he said, thrusting his phone at me. On the screen was a Facebook post from Grace Morrison, dated about an hour earlier. Some of you may have heard rumors about my friend Lila Granger and her current housing situation. I want everyone to know that Lila is the victim of financial abuse by her estranged husband, who sold her home out from under her in an act of spite and revenge. This is what happens when men can't handle strong, independent women. Lila needs our support during this difficult time. Financial abuse. Support survivors. Women supporting women. The post already had dozens of likes and comments, most of them expressing outrage at my alleged behavior and support for Lila's plight. Financial abuse? I said, scrolling through the comments. I'm financially abusing her by not paying her rent? It gets worse, Frank said. Keep reading. The comments were a mix of sympathy for Lila and condemnation for me. Several people were sharing their own stories of financial abuse, creating a thread that painted me as part of a broader pattern of male oppression. But what really caught my attention was a comment from Jennifer Walsh. Lila is staying with friends right now, but she needs a more permanent solution. If anyone knows of affordable housing options, please message me directly. She's crowdsourcing her housing problem, I said, and making you the villain in the process. I handed Frank his phone back and walked to the edge of the dock, looking out at the harbor. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if I hadn't been dealing with the wreckage of my marriage. You know what the funny thing is? I said finally. What? She's right about one thing. I am trying to control the situation, but not the way she thinks. How so? She keeps trying to have it both ways, independence when it's convenient, dependence when it's necessary. She wants to make her own choices but have someone else deal with the consequences. I'm just making sure that's not an option anymore. And if she can't handle that? I thought about Lila, about the woman I'd married 20 years ago and the stranger she'd become, about Carter and his empty promises, about Grace and her social media campaigns, about the whole mess that had started with a simple request for separation. Then she'll learn what real independence actually costs, I said. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. This isn't over. You're going to regret what you've done. I showed it to Frank, who whistled low. Think it's Carter? Probably. Though it could be Lila or Grace, or any of their supporters who think I'm the villain in this story. You worried? I thought about it. Was I worried? About anonymous threats from people who thought they could intimidate me into subsidizing my wife's affair? About social media campaigns designed to make me look like an abuser? No, I said finally. I'm not worried. But I think maybe it's time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. Meaning it's time for everyone to learn the whole truth about Carter Madsen and his business model. and about what Lila really knew about his situation when she decided to throw away 20 years of marriage. Frank grinned, the same expression he'd worn back in high school when we were planning pranks that would be talked about for years. Now you're talking. What do you need? Information, documentation, and maybe a little help from someone who knows how to use social media more effectively than Grace Morrison. I know just the person. As we walked back toward shore, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The satisfaction of having a plan that might actually work. Lila wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that some games have consequences she never saw coming. The end. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.